I found that, but I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. I wanted to finish up with Thomas Paine. As long as I can find it. There's so many notes I make in these things. Under our present denomination of British subjects, we can neither be received nor heard abroad. That means they didn't want to hear from them at the Home Office, in their government. They didn't want to hear from them, and they weren't going to let them be seen. The custom of all courts is against us, and will be so until, by an independence, we take rank with other nations, which means until they can actually get out from underneath of that tyrannical government, they will never be equal to other nations. And quite frankly, what we got supposedly after independence put us above other nations, all of the other nations. Something to think about. These proceedings may at first, now he's talking about the fight and the struggle for independence. These proceedings may at first appear strange and difficult, but like all other steps which we have already passed over, will in a little time become familiar and agreeable, and until an independence is declared, the continent will feel itself like a man who continues putting off some unpleasant business from day to day, yet knows it must be done, hates to set about it, wishes it over, and continually haunted with the thoughts of its necessity. So we will be nagged by this until we consider a solution to the problems we find ourselves in, and this is exactly where they were in 1776. And now from the appendix section of Common Sense. On these grounds I rest the matter, and as no offer hath yet been made to refute the doctrine contained in the former editions of this pamphlet, it is a negative proof that either the doctrine cannot be refuted, or the party in favor of it are too numerous to be opposed. Wherefore, instead of gazing at each other with suspicious or doubtful curiosity, let each of us hold out to his neighbor the hearty hand of friendship, and unite in drawing in a line which, like an act of oblivion, shall bury in forgetfulness every former dissentation. Let the name of Whig and Tory, which today would be Republican and Democrat, supposedly, be extinct, and let none other be heard among us than those of a good citizen, an open and resolute friend, and a virtuous supporter of the rights of mankind and of the free and independent states of America. Remember, after the Civil War, war between the states was over, we were no longer referred to as United States are. It became the United States is. So back to that reminder about elections. And that came right out of the Declaration of Rights. So the Common Sense was February 14, 1776. By May, many people were already pushing for a united declaration. And George Mason was one of those. He himself had written, supposedly, although it's not, I don't think he signed it, which back then was not uncommon. You didn't necessarily want to stick your neck out too far, but publishing it was just as good. There were many people asking their fellow neighbors and neighboring colonies to go ahead and support independence. So with that convention winding into a Declaration of Rights, we find the final draft done on June the 12th, 1776 by that group which had formerly been known as the House of Burgesses in Virginia, Williamsburg. A Declaration of Rights made by the representatives of the good people of Virginia, assembled in full and free convention, which rights do pertain to them and their posterity, as the basis and foundation of government. 1. That all men by nature equally free and independent, and have certain inherent rights, of which, when they enter into a state of society, they cannot, by any compact, deprive or divest their posterity, namely, the enjoyment of life and liberty, with the means of acquiring and possessing property, and pursuing and obtaining happiness and safety. Some of those words sound familiar. This was June 1776, June 12th, in Williamsburg, Virginia. Number 2, that all power is vested in and consequently derived from the people, that magistrates are their trustees and servants, and at all times amenable to them. Think about what that means. This is not just a declaration of the position of the people. It is a restructuring of government. 3, that government is, or ought to be, instituted for the common benefit, protection, and security of the people, nation, or community. Of all the various modes and forms of government, that is best, which is capable of producing the greatest degree of happiness and safety, and is most effectually secured against the danger of maladministration. And that whenever any government shall be found inadequate or contrary to these purposes, a majority of the community hath the indubitable, unalienable, and indefeasible right to reform, alter, or abolish it in such a manner as shall be judged most conducive to the public weal. Public weal, by the way, meaning the public body politic. That would be the people who have the right to vote, like you and me, perhaps. Number 4, that no man or set of men are entitled to exclusive or separate emoluments and privileges from the community, but in consideration of public services, which, not being descendable, neither ought the offices of magistrate, legislator, or judge to be hereditary. That means like no families running things. But we do have that, don't we? Descendants of powerful people still hanging on to power. What did we lose? Number 5, that the legislative and executive powers of the state, and this is the one I was talking about, I think. I'll start that over. That the legislative and executive powers of the state should be separate and distinct from the judicative, and that the members of the two first may be restrained from oppression by feeling and participating the burthens of the people. They should, at fixed periods, be reduced to a private station, return into the body from which they were originally taken, and the vacancies be supplied by frequent, certain, and regular elections. Certain, in which all or any part of the former members to be again eligible or ineligible, as the law shall direct. Term limits. They were thinking it then. They declared it should be 1776. That's still in the Virginia Constitution, by the way. Unfortunately, the rest of the Constitution as it sits, written from 1970, gives these people the power to decide who shall and shall not be eligible. And unfortunately, there are no term limits, really. Not in the legislative branch. There is in the governor's branch. They did bring that down to 1 term. Hurrah. We've already seen what 1 term, without the people being able to stop problems, we see what happens, even with 1 term. So consider that, yes, they were on the right path here, but more power. Of course, then you can go back to the position 3. And yes, position 3, where it says that we can abolish it or any part of it. So it's really the people of our state who need to pick up the ball and run with it. And oh, by the way, check your state constitution. And you're probably going to find a Bill of Rights that say pretty much the same thing, because all of the other states either copied this one when it came to writing their Bill of Rights and their constitutions, or they got pretty close to it. Let me keep moving because there's more here. Number 6, the elections of members to serve as representatives of the people in assembly ought to be free, and that all men having sufficient evidence of permanent common interest with and attachment to the community have the right of suffrage, and cannot be taxed or deprived of their property for public uses without their own consent or that of their representatives so elected, nor bound by any law to which they have not, in like manner, assented for the public good. That means we should be having referendums on how they spend our money, shouldn't we? Not just leaving it up to some person who runs a dynasty, election after election after election. It's not the governor who creates the bills for spending, though he or she likes to send a Christmas list to the legislators. No, it's the legislators who need to be capped in their terms of office, but you don't want to do that. That takes away their power. Come on. This is 1776. This is people writing by candlelight. What do they know? Boy. Number 7, that all power of suspending laws or the execution of laws by any authority without consent of the representatives of the people is injurious to their rights and ought not to be exercised. Well, now, that means if they had a national government, wouldn't that also kind of say, gee, us in the state, if we think that a law sucks and it's going to hurt us, it shouldn't be exercised, no matter how much free fiat cash they want to print and hand over to that particular state. And remember, that figure comes out of your wallet, whether you like it or not. It's not free. Number 8, that in all capital and criminal prosecutions a man hath a right to demand the cause and nature of his accusation, to be confronted with the accusers and witnesses, to call for evidence in his favor, and to a speedy trial by an impartial jury of his vicinage, without whose unanimous consent he cannot be found guilty. nor can he be compelled to give evidence against himself, that no man be deprived of his liberty except by the law of the land or the judgment of his peers. Yeah. Aren't some people being held prisoner without a speedy trial somewhere in this country already, still now? What's next? Bringing back the prison ships? This is June the 12th, 1776, everybody. We are in big trouble now because they did the right thing. We're not doing anything. Number 9. And by the way, doesn't a lot of this sound like the Constitution? Just saying. That excessive bail ought not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. Number 10. That general warrants whereby any officer or messenger may be commanded to search suspected places without evidence of a fact committed, or to seize any person or persons not named or whose office is not particularly described and supported by the evidence, are grievous and oppressive and ought not to be granted. Sounds kind of like the Fourth Amendment, doesn't it? That in controversies respecting property and in suits between man and man, the ancient trial by jury is preferable to any other and ought to be held sacred. 13. That a well-regulated militia composed of the body of the people trained to arms is the proper, natural, and safe defense of a free state. That standing armies in peacetime should be avoided as dangerous to liberty, and that in all cases the military should be under strict subordination to and governed by the civil power. Number 14. That the people have a right to uniform government, and therefore that no government separate from or independent of the government of Virginia ought to be erected or established within the limits thereof. Now that is a little bit of a sticky wicket, for if we were to consider our current day position, perhaps we may want to consider breaking position 14. But they may have also been thinking of, well, England isn't just going to say we're going to resettle this spot right here in the middle of the state and you guys are just going to have to tough it out. So what they were really doing is kind of wrapping their arms around everything called Virginia and claiming it to their own, which is understandable for the period. Number 15. That no free government or the blessing of liberty can be preserved to any people but by a firm adherence to justice, moderation, temperance, frugality, and virtue, and by frequent recurrence of fundamental principles. Number 16. The religion or the duty which we owe to our Creator and the manner of discharging it can be directed only by reason and conviction, not by force or violence, and therefore all men are equally entitled to the free exercise of religion according to the dictates of conscience, and that it is the mutual duty of all to practice Christian forbearance, love, and charity towards each other. An impressive piece of work. And then, in a very short period of time, of course, it's been said, I believe, that the draft of that was sent up to Philadelphia by Light Horse Harry Lee brother of Richard Henry Lee, in along with the resolution by Virginia to call for a separation from England. So that's why some of that ends up in the Declaration of Independence in the very beginning, where Jefferson and the committee put together how we have the power to do this. It's an inalienable power, and a lot of that comes from this work. So something to think about for the 4th of July. I know that we talk about the cost of gas and the cost of a barbecue, but think about the cost of independence. And think about how we're losing everything, or have lost, perhaps lost, everything that everyone who ever gave their life for this 4th of July. Take care.